He stood in the hallway of a Holiday Inn Express in Dallas, Texas, holding a key card that didn't belong in his hand, wearing a dress shirt he'd ironed in the car, using a flat iron he'd borrowed from his neighbor the night before. And he had just opened the wrong door. That's where this story really begins. Not in the courtroom. Not in the parking lot of the elementary school, where he'd cried in his car for 11 minutes before going inside to pick up his daughter. Not in the kitchen at 2 in the morning when he'd sat on the floor and eaten crackers because cooking felt like too much of a commitment. No, it begins right here, in a beige hallway that smelled faintly of chlorine and carpet cleaner, with a 7-year-old asleep in the car downstairs, and a woman on the other side of that open door looking at him with curious brown eyes and the kind of patient smile that a person only develops after years of being surprised by people. She tilted her head, just slightly. "Can I help you?" And Harlan Decker, 38 years old, father of one, widower of 14 months, and a man who had not experienced a single uninterrupted night of sleep since October of the previous year, said absolutely nothing for 3 full seconds. That's the moment. Right there. Hold it for a second, because everything that happens next, the custody case, the revelation at the breakfast table, the phone call he almost didn't make, the document that fell out of her bag and changed everything, it all traces back to those 3 seconds in a doorway on the 2nd floor of a Dallas hotel on a Wednesday evening in March. But to understand why any of it matters, you need to understand who Harlan Decker was before he was the nervous man in the wrong hallway. And that means going back about 14 months. To a Tuesday in January. To a hospital room in Knoxville, Tennessee. To a woman named Beth. Beth Decker had the kind of laugh that filled a room and then lingered there after she left, like a sound echo you couldn't quite place. She laughed at things other people found unremarkable. A confused pelican, a misprint on a cereal box, the way her husband pronounced the word particularly. She was an occupational therapist, a fierce advocate for her patients, a person who remembered the names of grocery store cashiers and asked them follow-up questions the next time she saw them. She had red-brown hair she kept in a braid most days, and a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest human," which she considered the highest possible compliment. She had also, for 19 months, been fighting stage 3 breast cancer with the same stubborn relentlessness she brought to everything else in her life. Harlan had believed she would win. He believed it not naively, not blindly, but with a specific and practiced faith, the kind you build brick by brick out of doctor's appointments attended and medications administered and prayers said quietly in the shower so your kid doesn't hear. He believed it because Beth believed it, and Beth's belief in things had never once let him down. Until it did. She passed on a Tuesday, January 14th. Rosie had been at her grandmother's house. Harlan had been in the room. He held her hand. He said everything he needed to say, and some things he hadn't known he needed to say until the words were already out. And then she was gone, and the room kept being a room, and the hospital kept being a hospital, and Harlan kept being alive, which in those first few weeks felt less like a gift and more like a clerical error. He moved through the next several months in the way that grief forces you to move, not gracefully, but forward. He got up because Rosie needed breakfast. He drove to school because Rosie needed to be in school. He kept the lights on and the laundry running and the pantry stocked because Rosie needed a home that functioned, even if the man running it felt like a machine operating about 30% below capacity. What he didn't do, what he couldn't quite manage, was keep his job. He'd been a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Knoxville. Good salary, good benefits, a supervisor who liked him. But grief does strange things to a person's relationship with time. Deadlines that had once felt concrete began to feel like suggestions. Meetings he'd once been early for, he started missing entirely. He wasn't negligent. He wasn't causing harm. He was just present in body and absent in every other way that mattered professionally. They let him go in September. Kindly, with a severance package and a letter of recommendation and genuine human sorrow from his supervisor, who hugged him and said they hoped things got easier. Harlan thanked him and walked to his car and sat there for a while, staring at the steering wheel, thinking about how much he wished he could call Beth and tell her what had just happened, and then remembering, again, that he couldn't. He spent the fall freelancing, some contract work, enough to keep the bills from becoming a crisis. But it was precarious, and he knew it. And somewhere around November, right around the time Rosie started having nightmares and Harlan started sleeping on the floor outside her bedroom door, so she'd know he was there, he made a decision to get serious, to find something stable, something that would prove to himself and to anyone watching that he was holding this life together. Anyone watching. That phrase had taken on a new and specific weight in his world, because by November, someone actually was. Her name was Patrice Sutton. She was Beth's older sister. And to be fair to Patrice, because fairness matters and because she genuinely believed she was doing the right thing, she had concerns about Rosie. She had watched her niece grow quieter over the past months. She had noticed the dark circles under Harlan's eyes at Thanksgiving. She had heard, secondhand from their mother, that Harlan had been let go from his job, and she had done the math the way frightened people do, not carefully, but urgently. In December, Harlan received a letter from a family law attorney in Knoxville. Patrice had filed a petition for modified custody. She wasn't trying to take Rosie away permanently. The letter was careful to explain. She wanted to be named a co-guardian, a second parent in the eyes of the court, until Harlan could demonstrate sustained stability. The language was measured and legal and thoroughly devastating. Harlan read the letter 3 times at the kitchen table. Then he put it face down on the counter and made Rosie's lunch for the next morning. Ham and cheese on wheat, the crust cut off, a note that said, "You're the best part of my day," because he wrote that on every single note, every single morning, without exception. He cried later, in the bathroom, with the faucet running. A court date had been set for mid-April. He had 4 months to demonstrate, to the satisfaction of a family court liaison who had been assigned to evaluate his household, that he was a fit and capable sole parent. Harlan had hired an attorney. He had started seeing a therapist, not because the court required it, but because his attorney strongly suggested it. He had started applying for jobs with a focused, almost mechanical intensity, which is what brought him to Dallas on a Wednesday evening in March. There was a position at a project management firm based there, a company called Hartfield Infrastructure Group, that had reached out to him through a contact. Senior project manager role, competitive salary, full benefits. The kind of job that would look very good to a family court judge. The kind of job that felt, in Harlan's current life, less like a career opportunity and more like a lifeline thrown from a helicopter. He'd driven because flying with Rosie felt complicated and leaving her behind felt impossible. So they'd done it together, 9 hours from Knoxville to Dallas. Rosie in the back seat with her colored pencils and an audiobook about a girl who befriends a horse. Harlan drinking gas station coffee and rehearsing answers to interview questions in his head while Emmylou Harris played low on the stereo. By the time they pulled into the hotel parking lot, it was past 8:30 and Rosie had been asleep since Texarkana. He'd carried her inside, all 42 pounds of her cheek against his shoulder, sneakers still on, and gotten their key cards at the front desk and taken the elevator to the second floor. He'd been given room 214. He was sure of that. He had looked at the little paper sleeve the key cards came in, and it said 214, and he had nodded and thanked the young woman at the desk. What he hadn't done, in a long walk down the hallway with his daughter on his shoulder and his rolling suitcase dragging behind him, was look closely enough at the room number on the door before he inserted the key card. The door swung open. The lights were on. There was a suitcase on the luggage rack, a blazer hanging over the back of the desk chair, and a woman sitting at the small desk with a laptop open in front of her, a pen tucked behind one ear, and a glass of water at her right elbow. She looked up. She did not scream. She did not look afraid. She looked, if anything, mildly curious, the way a person looks when something unexpected happens that falls short of alarming. She tilted her head, smiled. "Can I help you? Stay with me here, because what happens in the next 45 seconds matters more than it seems like it should." Harlan stood in the doorway with his daughter asleep on his shoulder and his suitcase blocking the door from closing, and a look on his face that could only be described as a man rebooting. He looked at the woman. He looked at the room. He looked at the key card in his hand, then at the number on the open door, 241, and understood. "I'm so sorry," he said, in a voice barely above a whisper, because Rosie was still asleep and some instincts survive even total mortification. I'm on the wrong door. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry." The woman waved a hand, not dismissively, kindly, the way you wave when someone says sorry for bumping into you and you want them to know it's truly fine. "It happens," she said, matching his low volume automatically, glancing at the sleeping child on his shoulder. Her voice was warm but measured. "You're at 214? "Yeah. Other direction. Down past the ice machine." "Thank you," he said. "And I'm sorry. Again. Good night," she said, already turning back to her laptop. He pulled the door closed, stood in the hallway for a moment, adjusted Rosie on his shoulder, walked the other direction. That should have been the end of it. But here's the thing about hotels, about the particular compressed intimacy of staying in a building full of strangers. It almost never is the end of it. And this woman, this stranger with the patient smile and the pen behind her ear, she had a laptop open to a document that Harlan didn't see, dense with names, full of dates and addresses and notes written in the kind of shorthand that only made sense to the person who'd written them. A document she closed gently as the door clicked shut, and then sat looking at for a moment with an expression that the narrator of this story can only describe as thoughtful. Her name was Sloan Aldrich. She was 34 years old. She worked for a firm called Covenant Family Services, which was contracted by several Tennessee county courts to conduct household evaluations and parent assessments in contested custody cases. She had been doing this job for 6 years. She was good at it. Thorough, fair, not easily impressed, and not easily fooled, with a genuine belief that children's welfare was worth getting right even when it was hard. She was in Dallas for a conference. 2 days of family services professionals presenting papers and arguing methodology and eating bad hotel food while talking about the best ways to protect children caught in the middle of adult conflicts. She had flown in that evening. She had checked in. She had ordered room service, opened her laptop, and been working through her case files, because Sloan was the kind of person who worked through case files on personal travel time. When a man knocked open her door with a sleeping child on his shoulder and the look of someone who had been holding everything together for so long that the effort had become invisible even to him. She noticed that look. It was part of her job to notice it. She also noticed, and this is where the story gets complicated and where you should probably lean forward just slightly, that the name on the case file she had minimized before turning around was one she had been reviewing earlier that evening. Decker, H. Knoxville, TN. Évaluation pending. Site visit scheduled for March 28th. She didn't connect the dots. Not yet. She had no reason to. She had seen a tired man with a sleeping daughter who'd opened the wrong door. That was all. The name was common enough, and her mind had categorized the interaction and filed it under hotel anecdotes before she'd even turned fully back to her screen. She went back to work. She drank her water. She did not think about the man in the hallway again. Not that night. Rosie Decker woke up the next morning at 6:52 with the focused energy of a child who has slept deeply and wants everyone else to know about it. She wanted to know where they were, whether they could get waffles, and whether the pool was open. Harlan answered all three questions with the groggy patience of a man who had been awake since 5:30, rehearsing interview answers in his head. Yes, they were in Dallas. Probably waffles. Let's go see. And no, pools don't open before breakfast. Rosie, please put your shoes on. The hotel breakfast area was half full when they arrived. A mix of business travelers, a family with two toddlers, a man in a polo shirt reading the paper. Rosie made a beeline for the waffle iron with the confidence of someone who had done this before, which she had. They'd stayed at 3 hotels in the past year, during the stretch of time when Harlan had been trying to visit potential job markets before the serious Dallas opportunity materialized. Harlan poured coffee, found him a corner table by the window, and began the careful negotiations required to convince a 7-year-old that she needed something on her plate besides waffles and a side of orange juice that she would drink 4 sips of and abandon. He was in the middle of this, adding strawberries to her plate with the focused tactical energy of a man who knew that presentation mattered to 7-year-olds, when he heard a voice from 2 tables over. The waffle iron. Did she get the hang of it herself? He looked up. It was the woman from room 241. She was carrying a coffee cup and a plate with scrambled eggs and half a grapefruit, and she was looking at Rosie with a mild, amused expression. Harlan felt a wave of something he was not going to call embarrassment because he'd already used up his embarrassment allocation the night before. He settled for straightforward. She did, he said. She's a veteran. The woman laughed. Not performatively, just a quick, genuine sound. Can I? She nodded at the empty seats across from them. He hesitated, not because he didn't want the company. If he was honest, he was lonely in a specific way that hotel breakfasts make you lonely when you're eating with a child who can't talk about anything except waffles and whether dogs can eat waffles. He hesitated because he was still vaguely mortified. Please, he said. She sat, set down her coffee, extended a hand across the table. Sloan. Harlan. He shook it, nodded toward his daughter. And that's Rosie. She'll introduce herself when she's done negotiating with the machine. Sloan smiled. What'd she want from it? A perfect waffle. Every time. Is there any other kind? Not in her view, no. That was how it started. Easy. Low stakes. The kind of conversation you have at a hotel breakfast where everyone is a stranger and no one is expected to be anything more than briefly, pleasantly human to one another. They talked about the drive from Knoxville. Sloan had flown, sympathized about 9 hours in the car. They talked about Dallas in March, which was warm and a little windy. They talked briefly and lightly about what had brought them each there, the way strangers do when the real answers are complicated, vague gestures toward conferences and job stuff, and just passing through. When Rosie finally appeared at the table with a waffle that was, she declared, acceptable, she looked at Sloan with a frank, unguarded assessment that only small children and senior citizens can deliver without social penalty. Are you our friend? She asked. Rosie, Harlan said. I'd like to be, Sloan said, with exactly the right tone, neither condescending nor falsely enthusiastic. Just honest. What's your name? Rosie Decker. I'm 7 and I know how to make waffles. So I heard. Do you want one? I can make another one. I have eggs, but thank you. That's very generous. Rosie considered this. Sat down. Cut her waffle into squares with the surgical concentration of a child performing important work. Harlan watched Sloan across the table. She was easy to be around in the way that certain people are, not because they're performing ease, but because they're genuinely comfortable in their own skin, and that comfort radiates outward and puts you at ease too. She had dark hair she wore pulled back loosely, the kind of face that was striking without being dramatic about it, and eyes that paid attention in a way Harlan noticed without being able to fully articulate. There was something about the way she listened. Not passive, not just waiting for her turn. She listened like the information mattered, like she was filing it somewhere useful. That particular quality you would think about later, in a very different context. They stayed at the table longer than the breakfast warranted, Sloane refilling her coffee, Harlan helping Rosie with a second waffle that was deemed superior to the first. And by the time they finally stood to leave, something had shifted slightly. Not dramatically, not in a way that demanded acknowledgement. Just the quiet reclassification that happens between strangers when they've passed the point of being strangers. "Good luck today," Sloane said, gathering her things. "With the job thing." "Thanks," Harlan said. He meant it more than the word carried. She smiled, that same patient, unhurried smile from the night before, and walked toward the elevator. Harlan watched her go for approximately 2 seconds before Rosie tugged on his hand and asked whether dolphins could eat waffles, which was a question that required his full attention. Here's what you need to pay attention to, though, because the story is doing something right now, and you might miss it if you blink. Sloane Aldrich went back to her room after breakfast, sat at the desk, and opened her laptop. She pulled up her conference schedule for the morning. She answered 2 emails. She poured herself a second cup of water from the tap. And then, because she was thorough and because she was between conference sessions and because she always did her prep work, she opened her case file folder and pulled up the Decker file. She read through it with the efficient, practiced eye she brought to all her files. The background, the history, the petitioner's concerns, the timeline of the marriage, the illness, the death, the job loss, the current employment search, the daughter's school records, the notes from the school counselor, who had written warmly about Rosie's resilience and flagged a period of withdrawal in the fall that had resolved by December. She read about the upcoming site visit, scheduled for March 28th, 6 days away. She read the name again. Harlan Decker, Knoxville, Tennessee. And something clicked. She sat back, set the laptop aside, stared at the middle distance for a moment with the expression of a person doing arithmetic in their head. Harlan, Rosie, the drive from Knoxville, the dress shirt that was slightly too carefully pressed for a man traveling casually, the way he'd held his daughter against his shoulder like she was something fragile and essential at the same time. She picked up her phone, pulled up the contact she had for the petitioner's attorney, stared at it, and she put the phone down. She had not confirmed anything. She had a common name and a coincidence of geography. She was not going to call anyone about a coincidence. That was not how she operated. But she did go down to the conference session that morning feeling, for the first time in a long time, that she was not quite sure what the right thing to do was. And Sloane Aldrich almost always knew what the right thing to do was. That was sort of her whole professional identity. She sat through a 90-minute presentation on attachment theory and court evaluation methodology and thought about a man who wrote notes on his daughter's lunch every single morning. That detail was in the file. The school counselor had mentioned it. Rosie had told her teacher about it. It had been included as a small, unremarkable anecdote in a section of the file about parental involvement. It hadn't seemed small to Sloane when she'd first read it. It seemed even less small now. Harlan's interview was at 2 o'clock. He dropped Rosie with a babysitter, a service through the hotel concierge, a cheerful college student named Megan who arrived with a backpack full of art supplies and immediately won Rosie's complete trust by knowing every word to 2 different songs from a movie Rosie loved, and drove to the Hartfield Infrastructure Group offices in his iron shirt and the blazer he'd been carrying carefully in a dry cleaning bag since Knoxville. The interview lasted an hour and 40 minutes, which Harlan took as a good sign because no one spends that long with a candidate they're not interested in. He talked about project management, about his history, about his strengths. He was asked about the gap in his employment history, which he had prepared for, and he answered it honestly. His wife had passed away. He'd had a difficult period. He was on solid footing now and ready to commit fully. He watched the two interviewers' faces as he said it, saw the flicker of human recognition. Neither of them pushed further. He drove back to the hotel with the windows down and Emmylou Harris back on the stereo. And for the first time in months, in a very long time, something in his chest felt just slightly less compressed. Not fixed, not healed, but lighter in the way that a good day can make things feel lighter even when the underlying weight hasn't changed. He picked up Rosie, who had made 3 drawings and learned a card trick from Megan and eaten half a sleeve of cracker from the backpack. They went upstairs. He changed out of his interview clothes with something approaching ceremony, hanging the blazer carefully, putting the shirt in the laundry bag, putting on jeans and a soft flannel shirt that had been Beth's favorite on him, because she said it made him look like someone who could fix things. He sat on the edge of the bed for a moment. Just sat there. "Daddy," Rosie said. She was at the desk, drawing. She didn't look up. "Yeah, Bug. Do you think Mommy knows about this trip?" He was quiet for a moment. This was not the first time she had asked something like this. He had learned, over 14 months, not to deflect it or redirect it or try to make it less than it was. "I think she knows," he said. "I think she's been watching the whole thing." Rosie considered this, kept drawing. "I told Megan about her," she said. "Megan said she sounded wonderful. She was," Harlan said. "She really, really was." They ordered delivery for dinner. Rosie wanted pizza and got it. Harlan ate half of one slice and drank a soda and watched a nature documentary with his daughter until she fell asleep against his arm on the hotel bed. And then he sat there for another half hour in the dark, not moving because she was comfortable and warm, and it seemed criminal to disturb that. He thought about the interview, about the custody case, about the family court liaison who would be visiting his house in 6 days, about the way Patrice had looked at him at Christmas, not unkindly, but with that quiet, assessing worry that he'd been unable to fully defuse no matter what he said. And then, for no reason he could have explained, he thought about Sloane Aldrich and her patient smile, and he felt, strangely, a little less alone. Now, pay very close attention to what happens next, because this is the part of the story that looks like an ordinary evening and is actually a fuse. He ran into her again the next morning. Not at breakfast. He'd gotten there early and missed her, but at the vending machine on the second floor at 11 o'clock, where he'd gone for a ginger ale because Rosie had a slight stomach ache and ginger ale was a non-negotiable Decker family remedy. Sloane was there with a cup of ice from the ice machine, which she was filling with water from a plastic bottle because she told him hotel tap water tasted like the inside of a pipe. They ended up talking for 20 minutes in the hallway next to the vending machine. Then they went and sat in the small seating area by the elevator because their legs got tired. Then Rosie, who had accompanied Harlan on the ginger ale mission, fell asleep again on a small couch in the seating area because she fell asleep everywhere and anywhere and always had, a trait Beth had called a superpower. It was in this accidental, improvised conversation, leaning back in hotel chairs while a child slept 3 feet away, that things got real. Harlan couldn't tell you how it happened exactly. There's a certain kind of tiredness, the long-haul kind, that dissolves the usual social architecture. The small talk scaffolding comes down, and what's left underneath is just a person saying true things. He told her about Beth, not the broad strokes. He'd given her those at breakfast, the specific things, the coffee mug, the braid, the laugh that stayed in her room, the way she'd faced the last 6 months of her illness with an anger that eventually became acceptance, and then, somehow, became something close to peace. The way she'd made Harlan promise, in the last clear weeks, not to disappear into himself. "You're a good dad," she told him. "Don't let grief make you a ghost." He'd tried. He'd really tried. Sloane listened to all of this. She didn't fill the silences with sympathy noises. She didn't tilt her head in that particular trained way that said, "I'm performing active listening." She just listened, which was rarer than it should have been and more valuable than he realized at the time. "Can I ask what the job thing is about?" she said, when he'd come back from the memories to the present. "Is it just finances? Or is there more to it?" He looked at her, measured something, made a decision. "There's a custody situation," he said. "Beth's sister, she filed a petition. She thinks I'm not. She's worried about Rosie's stability. And I get it. I do. She loves Rosie. She's not a bad person. But there's a court date in April, and there's an evaluation scheduled, and I need to have my life looking stable enough that a judge agrees with me." He paused. "The job in Dallas, if I get it, that's a big piece of that." Sloane said nothing for a moment. Her expression was composed. Still, the specific kind of stillness that isn't emptiness but is instead very deliberate. "That sounds incredibly stressful," she said. "It is." He almost laughed. "It really is. But also, I know I'm a good dad. I know it. And I think somewhere Patrice knows it too. She's just scared. She loved Beth, and she lost her, and Rosie is the piece of Beth she's trying to hold on to. I understand that." He looked at his hands. "Doesn't make it less hard." Sloane nodded slowly. "No," she said. "It doesn't." There was a pause that wasn't uncomfortable. The kind of pause where something has been said that deserves to just sit for a moment. "What kind of work do you do?" he asked. "The conference, what's it for?" She hesitated. It was brief, so brief that a person not paying attention wouldn't catch it. But Harlan was paying attention, and he noticed it, filed it somewhere without knowing why. "Family services," she said. "I work with families going through transitions, difficult periods, custody situations sometimes." She said the last part evenly, looking at Rosie on the couch. "Oh," Harlan said. "That must be hard work." "It can be," she said. "It can also be the most important work in the world, depending on the day." He nodded, looked at his daughter. "Yeah," he said. "I believe that." They sat for another few minutes. Then Rosie stirred, and Harlan said he should take her back to the room, and Sloane said she had a conference lunch session she was already late for. They stood. The particular awkwardness of ending a conversation that has gone deeper than a hallway conversation was designed to go. "The evaluation thing," Sloane said, picking up her key card from the seat beside her. "For what it's worth, from someone who works in that space, the fact that you drove 9 hours with your daughter rather than leave her, the note on the lunch bag, the instinct to protect her sleep at the expense of your own dignity." She stopped herself, looked at him directly. "That stuff shows. Evaluators see it." Harlan stared at her. Something about the specificity of it. Notes on the lunch bags, she'd said, and how did she know about that? He hadn't mentioned it. Something small and quiet moved through him. Not an alarm. Not yet. Just the faintest, strangest feeling of having missed something. "Thank you," he said. She nodded, walked toward the elevator, pressed the button. She didn't look back. And that was the moment. Right there, the lunch bag detail, when you should have known. The story was telling you something. Whether you heard it is a different question. He got the call from Hartfield at 4 that afternoon. They wanted him. Senior project manager, starting April 15th. The salary was everything he'd hoped, and then slightly more. The benefits were solid. The hiring manager was a plain-speaking man named Mr. Farr who said, simply, "We like you in the room. We think you're the right person." Harlan sat on the edge of the hotel bed with his phone in his lap for a long time after the call ended. Rosie was watching a show on the tablet. He stared at the wall. He felt something he couldn't quite name. Not joy exactly, more like the sound of a rope that had been pulled taut for a very long time, finally going slack. Relief, so deep it was almost physical. He texted his attorney. He texted his therapist. He texted Rosie's school counselor, with whom he'd been in regular contact and who had been remarkably supportive throughout all of this. He did not text Patrice. He didn't know what he would say to Patrice yet. That conversation needed more space than a text message. Then, on an impulse he could not entirely explain, he went down to the hotel bar, a small, quietly lit room off the lobby, and ordered a beer he didn't particularly want, but that felt like the right thing to order when good news happened, and he sat alone with it for 20 minutes, thinking about Beth and how much she would have wanted to hear this. The job thing went well. He looked up. Sloane was at the bar 2 stools down, a glass of white wine in front of her, still wearing her conference lanyard. She must have come in while he was lost in his thoughts. He blinked, then smiled, and it was the real kind, the kind that had been scarce in his face for a long time. "Yeah," he said. "It went well." "I'm glad," she said simply. "You want to hear something ridiculous?" he said. "Always." "The first person I want to tell was a woman I've known for about 36 hours who I met by accident when I opened the wrong hotel door." She laughed, that quick, genuine sound he'd liked at breakfast. "That might be the best hotel story I've heard in a while." "It's not what I expected the week to be," he admitted. "No," she said, looking at her wine. "It's not what I expected either." She said it quietly, almost to herself. And there was something in the way she said it, a weight underneath the words that didn't fully match the lightness of the moment, that Harlan noticed but didn't pursue. He was too happy. He was too relieved. And sometimes the mind takes the path of least resistance because that path feels, for once, like exactly where it should be. They sat at the bar for over an hour. They talked the way people talk when all the preliminary layers have already been peeled back and what remains is something more direct. He told her more about Rosie, her drawings, her love of horses, her habit of sleeping everywhere, her quiet, considered way of processing emotion that Harlan privately believed she had inherited from Beth and not from him. He told her about the note on the lunch bag, that he wrote it every day, that it had started because Rosie's first week back at school after Beth died was the hardest week Harlan had ever personally witnessed, and he needed her to have something certain in the middle of all the uncertainty. Sloane listened. Her wine barely went down. Her eyes were steady and attentive and carrying something behind them that looked, if Harlan had known how to read it, like someone holding 2 separate conversations at once, the one she was having out loud, and a harder one she was having entirely alone. At one point, he noticed her phone on the bar. It was face down, but just before she'd put it down, he'd caught the edge of the screen. A word. Part of a word. It might have been a name. It might have been a file header. He couldn't have said. He didn't think about it. He should have. There are people in this world who carry a professional version of themselves so naturally that it doesn't feel like a mask until a moment comes. One specific, unscripted moment, when the 2 versions of themselves occupy the same space and cannot be reconciled without cost. Sloane Aldrich had spent 6 years building the skill of professional detachment. She had evaluated dozens of families. She had walked into homes where love was clearly present and into homes where something was clearly wrong, and she had always been able to hold what she saw at arm's length long enough to write an honest, accurate report. That was her job. That was her value to the court system. Not warmth. Not judgment. Accuracy. She lay in her hotel room that night. The room she had accidentally shared, briefly, with a tired man and a sleeping child 2 nights ago, and she stared at the ceiling and had the most uncomfortable professional conversation she had ever had with herself. She had confirmed it. She'd found a way to confirm it without being obvious about it. She'd asked about Rosie's school, and the name of the school had matched the school in the file, and that was all she needed. The man at the bar was Harlan Decker. Case number 2024, FCT 0077. Subject of a pending custody evaluation that she was scheduled to conduct in his home in 5 days. She had spent approximately 12 hours with him. She had watched him with his daughter. She had heard unprompted and in his own unguarded words. More about his parenting philosophy and his emotional life and his relationship with his late wife than she typically gathered in 3 formal interviews. She had 2 options. The first was to recuse herself, call her supervisor in the morning, explain that she had a conflict, an accidental personal connection to the subject, and have the file reassigned. It would delay the evaluation by 2 to 3 weeks and complicate the court timeline, but it was clean and ethical and professionally unambiguous. The second was to say nothing. Complete the evaluation as scheduled. Write the report based entirely on the professional site visit, discarding anything she had observed or heard in the past 2 days as outside the scope of her official assessment. She lay there for a long time. What she kept coming back to, and she did not like that she kept coming back to it, was this: she already knew. She knew, with a certainty that her 6 years of professional experience told her was sound, that Harlan Decker was not the man his sister-in-law feared he was. She knew it not from the hotel conversations, but from a dozen small specific things that fit the pattern of a man who was struggling and loving and present, not a man who was neglecting or harming. The custody petition had been filed out of grief, not evidence. She had seen this before. She knew what it looked like. But knowing it and saying it were 2 different things now, because she'd compromised her ability to say it in an official capacity by letting 2 days pass without disclosure. She closed her eyes. She thought about a 7-year-old with a perfect waffle and a sleeping habit and a dad who wrote notes every morning. She made a decision. What she didn't know was that the decision had already been made for her. They met one more time before checkout. Harlan was loading his suitcase into the elevator the next morning. They were leaving by 10. The drive home waiting, Rosie already vibrating with the specific energy of a child who has been in a hotel long enough and wants to be somewhere familiar, when Sloane came out of room 241 with a rolling bag and her blazer over one arm. Their eyes met across the hallway with the particular quality of an encounter that both people have been thinking about. "We're headed out," Harlan said. "Me too." She crossed toward the elevator, pressed the button alongside him. Rosie tugged on Sloane's blazer. Sloane looked down. "I made you a drawing," Rosie said, and produced a folded piece of hotel stationery from her jacket pocket. On it, in colored pencil, was a woman with dark hair and a yellow shirt, standing next to a man and a girl. There was a waffle in the corner. There were stars above them. Sloane took the drawing, looked at it for a long moment. Something moved through her face that she didn't attempt to suppress. "This is the best thing anyone's given me in a long time," she said. "It's us," Rosie said. "And that's the waffle. I put a waffle." "I see the waffle," Sloane said softly. "I love the waffle." The elevator opened. They got in, rode down in the particular silence that lives at the end of unexpectedly meaningful things. In the lobby, Harlan stopped. He didn't exactly know what he was about to say, but he knew he was about to say something. "If the evaluation goes well, in April, and things settle down, I like to stay in touch," he said. "I know that's probably an odd thing to say to someone you met 3 days ago in a hotel hallway." "It's not odd," Sloane said. Her voice was careful. Her face was careful. Something behind her eyes was working very hard. He reached into his wallet and gave her his business card. Old habit. His name, his number, his old firm's name crossed out in pen and independent written under it. She took it, looked at it, held it in a way that a person holds something they don't know yet what to do with. "I'll be in touch," she said. "I promise." He nodded, picked up his suitcase, took Rosie's hand. They walked toward the parking lot, and the morning light came through the automatic glass doors in one bright, clean sheet, and Rosie said, "Daddy, can we stop for biscuits on the way home?" And Harlan said yes, and the door swished shut behind them. Sloane stood in the lobby. She looked at the business card. She looked at the drawing that Rosie had made, a man and a woman and a girl under stars with a waffle in the corner, and she made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite anything else. Then she took out her phone and called her supervisor. Here's what happened next, and it matters that you hear all of it. Sloan told her supervisor everything. The accidental meeting, the hallway, the breakfasts, the bar, the conversation about the custody case. She was thorough, honest, and professional in a way that cost her something. She could hear her supervisor's long pause and knew what it meant. A conflict of interest, even accidental, even undeveloped, was a serious thing. The case would be reassigned. The evaluation timeline would be complicated. Her supervisor asked her if she believed her judgment was compromised. Sloan said, "I believe I observed something real, but I can't be the one to put it in a report because it won't stand. It needs to come from someone who hasn't spent 3 days in a hotel with him." She was right. Her supervisor told her she was right. The case was reassigned to a colleague. But that wasn't the end of Sloan's involvement, because Sloan did something else, something that was not in the protocol, but was entirely within her rights. She wrote a detailed memo, informal, not filed, not official, to the reassigned evaluator. Not about her impressions of Harlan, about the specific, observable behaviors she had witnessed in a non-clinical setting. The note on the lunch bag, the way he adjusted the blanket over Rosie in the elevator without being asked or prompted. The way he answered Rosie's questions about her mother without deflecting or minimizing. The consistent, quiet, non-performative quality of his attention toward his daughter. She wrote about these things clinically, carefully, with the vocabulary of her training. She noted that none of it was gathered in a formal evaluative context and should not be treated as such. It was background, texture, context. She emailed it, and she sat for a while. And then, after a day that she would later describe to a friend as the most professionally complicated day of my adult life, she opened her contacts and composed a text to the number on a business card. She stared at it for a long time before she sent it. "Hi, it's Sloan. From the wrong hotel door. There's something I should have told you before you left. It's not bad news. I want to be clear about that. But you deserve to hear it from me. Would you be willing to talk?" Harlan was in his kitchen in Knoxville when the message came through. He read it twice. Felt the small, cold drop of a thing that might be dread, might be something else. Called her. She told him everything. He listened without speaking. She had never been silent on the phone with someone who was silent in that particular way. The silence that is a person absorbing something that requires reconfiguration. When she finished, she said, "I understand if you're angry." "I'm not angry," he said. His voice was level. I don't know what I am. I should have told you sooner," she said. "When I confirmed it, I should have said something. I was trying to figure out the right thing to do, and I waited too long." "You did figure out the right thing to do," he said. "Eventually, that's how it usually goes." A pause, different from the ones in the hotel. Longer and more weighted. "The memo you wrote," he said, to the other evaluator. She had told him about the memo. "I didn't include anything that could be considered compromised testimony," she said quickly. "It was observations of behavior, nothing." "Sloan." He stopped her. His voice was quiet. "Thank you." She exhaled. A soft, held sound. "The evaluator who took the case," she said, "is someone I respect. He'll do a thorough, fair job. He doesn't need my memo, but it's there." "Okay," Harlan said. "Okay," she repeated. Another pause. "The drawing Rosie made," Harlan said. "Do you still have it?" "On my fridge." He laughed. The real kind, the surprising kind that comes when you're not expecting to laugh. "She'll be very pleased about that," he said. "Tell her I said the waffle was the best part." They stayed on the phone for another 30 minutes, talking about nothing particularly important. Talking the way two people talk when something complicated has just been made clean, and the clean space afterward is still a little raw and a little tender and also, quietly, unexpectedly, a little like relief. The custody evaluation took place on March 28th, as originally scheduled, though with a reassigned evaluator, a soft-spoken man named Walt, who wore reading glasses and took very neat notes, and asked Rosie what she liked to draw. He spent 2.5 hours in Harlan's house. He looked at the kitchen, the bedroom, the way the morning light came through Rosie's window. He read the note on the lunch bag. Harlan had made lunch that morning with the same routine he always used, because it was a routine, not a performance, and that distinction mattered. He talked to Rosie's teacher by phone with Harlan present. He talked to Harlan's therapist's office for a consent-authorized summary of progress. He did not ask about Dallas. He drove away. Harlan stood on the front step and watched the car until it turned the corner. Inside, Rosie was at the kitchen table drawing. She had a new set of colored pencils, a birthday present from Harlan's mother. She was drawing a house with a big window and a garden and a woman with dark hair standing at the gate. Harlan looked at the drawing over her shoulder. "Is that someone we know?" he asked carefully. Rosie looked up at him with a frank, bright look of a child who considers this a strange question. "It's Sloane," she said. "She has a fridge with my picture on it." "She does," Harlan said. "That means she's our friend," Rosie said, with the certainty of a 7-year-old who has already closed the case and moved on to more important matters, like whether the garden and the drawing needed a fence. Walt's report was submitted to the court on April 3rd. Harlan's attorney called him that afternoon. "It's good," she said. "It's really good." He sat down. "Walt's recommendation is for no modification to your custody arrangement," his attorney continued. He found no evidence of instability or neglect. He described the home environment as structured, warm, and child-centered. He specifically mentioned the consistency of daily routines and the strong attachment bond between you and Rosie. She paused. He also mentioned a note on a lunch bag. Harlan closed his eyes for a moment. "What happens now?" he said. "The hearing's still scheduled for April 15th. Patrice's attorney can file a response to the evaluation, but with a recommendation this clear, they'd be working uphill. My advice is that Patrice is going to want to consider a resolution before it goes before a judge. Something that gives her continued meaningful access to Rosie without a formal custody modification." "She can have that," Harlan said, without hesitation. "She's Rosie's family. She's Beth's sister. I never wanted to cut her out." "I know," his attorney said. "Tell her that. Not through me, to her. Call her yourself." He did. That evening. It was one of the harder phone calls of his life, not because it went badly, but because it went well in a specific painful way that things go well when two people finally stop being frightened of each other. Patrice cried. Harlan held the phone and let her. When she stopped, she said, "I just miss her so much." And Harlan said, "I know. Me too." Every single day. They agreed to talk more. They agreed to a schedule, regular visits, holidays, the kind of structure that gave Patrice what she actually needed, which was connection, not custody. The April 15th hearing lasted 22 minutes. The petition was withdrawn. The judge made a note and closed the case. Harlan walked out of the courthouse into an April afternoon that was cool and a little cloudy and smelled, for no particular reason, like rain that hadn't come yet. Rosie was at school. He'd go pick her up in 2 hours. He'd start his new job in 3 days. He called Sloane. "It's done," he said. "Tell me," she said. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm so glad, Harlan. I wanted you to know," he said. "First call." "I'm honored," she said. And she meant it. He stood on the courthouse steps with the phone pressed to his ear. "I owe you a real conversation," he said. "Not a hotel hallway. Not a phone call. You don't owe me anything," she said. "A waffle, at minimum," he said. She laughed. "The real one." "Yeah," she said. "A waffle at minimum." There are people who come into your life through the side door, not through the grand entrance you were expecting, not in the circumstances you would have chosen, not in ways that make the beginning easy to explain. They arrive sideways, through wrong turns and missed rooms and a door opened accidentally in a quiet hotel hallway at 8:30 at night. They arrive already knowing something true about you, even if you don't know that yet. And you arrive knowing something true about them, even if you don't have the vocabulary for it at the time. You recognize something. You can't name what you recognize because to name it would require admitting that you were looking and you weren't looking. You were just surviving. That's the thing about survival. It keeps its head down. It doesn't make grand plans. It makes lunch and drives to school and rehearses interview answers and carries its daughter on its shoulder down hotel hallways and opens the wrong door and then stands in the light from that wrong room, embarrassed and exhausted and more open than it means to be, and someone on the other side of that door does not look alarmed. She smiles. She says, "Can I help you?" And the answer, it turns out, the real answer, not the flustered one, is yes. In ways you can't see yet. In ways that will take months to become clear. In ways that are worth waiting for. A year later, Harlan Decker was sitting in a booth at a diner in Nashville. Not in Knoxville, not in Dallas, somewhere in the middle, with a cup of coffee and a folded menu he wasn't really reading, watching the door. He'd been working at Hartfield for 11 months. It was good work, solid work, the kind of work that asked a lot of him but gave something back. He'd settled into Dallas with Rosie, who was 8 now and opinionated about it in the way 8-year-olds are opinionated about everything. She had a new classroom, a new teacher, a best friend named Vivi who shared her conviction that horses were the superior animal. She had sleepovers now. She laughed more. She still had hard days. He still had hard days. Beth did not become a smaller presence just because time moved forward. She became, if anything, a more particular one. Specific memories instead of the wide, diffuse ache of early grief. The smell of the coffee mug she used to leave on the bathroom counter. The sound of the particular way she said his name when she was genuinely happy about something. He carried these things. He learned how to carry them without being carried away. The door opened. Sloan Aldrich came in from the April afternoon, unwrapping a scarf from around her neck, looking around the diner with those attentive eyes until she found him, and her face did the thing it did, settled into that particular expression that was still patient and still warm, and was also, by now, something more specific, something aimed. She slid into the booth across from him. "How was the drive?" he said. "Fine," she said. "Long." She picked up the menu. "Did you order?" "Waiting for you." She looked up over the menu. Looked at him for a moment with that look he'd learned to read now. Thoughtful, direct, a little private. "Rosie good?" she said. "She wants to know if the diner has waffles." Sloan looked at the menu. "It does." "Of course it does," Harlan said. She set the menu down. Looked at him across the table. Outside, the April light was doing what April light in the South does, coming in golden and slanted through the window, landing on the table between them. "You know what I think about sometimes?" she said. "Tell me." "You standing in that doorway with Rosie on your shoulder," she said, looking like a man who had no idea what was about to happen. "None," he confirmed. "And I remember thinking, this poor man, he's so tired, and he's opened the wrong door." She paused. What I didn't think was that the wrong door was going to turn out to be... She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. He reached across the table, set his hand next to hers, not on top of it, just alongside it. A small thing, an offered thing. She looked at their hands, looked at him. Her chin lifted very slightly, the way a person's does when they've made a decision. She turned her hand over. Outside, the April afternoon kept being an April afternoon. The coffee came. Somewhere in Nashville, A little girl with colored pencils was drawing a waffle under a ceiling of stars, adding more and more people to the picture, making the house bigger, putting more windows in it, letting more light in. That's how it works sometimes. You open the wrong door, and everything else, slowly, imperfectly, with more grace than you deserve, opens from there. Thanks for watching Crest Stories. If this one got you, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Drop a comment. Tell us, have you ever found something real in the middle of something that started all wrong? We read every single one. We'll see you in the next story.